Police harass. Elderly black man, his son, the town's most feared judge, stands tall. He was walking down the quiet street on a calm afternoon. The sun was warm, the birds were singing softly, and everything seemed peaceful. The elderly man moved slowly, his steps careful but steady. He was on his way to get some groceries, nothing more. His face showed years of life. The wrinkles told stories of hard work and family love. But suddenly, that peaceful walk was broken. 2 police officers stopped him without any warning. The man blinked in surprise, not understanding why they had called him over. His heart beat a little faster, confused and worried. He hadn't done anything wrong. He looked up at the officers, trying to keep calm, but he could feel the weight of their gaze on him, sharp, suspicious. They asked him questions, their voices hard, demanding answers he didn't have. He tried to explain, but it felt like they didn't want to listen as the questions kept coming. The man's hands trembled slightly. He felt a mix of fear and frustration. Why was this happening? He had lived in this town for decades, known many of the people here, helped neighbors when they needed it. But now, in this moment, he felt like a stranger, someone unwanted and misunderstood. His eyes searched the faces of the officers, hoping to find some kindness or understanding, but there was none. Around him, people walked by, some looking away quickly, others watching silently. The elderly man wished someone would step in, someone to say this was wrong, but no one did. The officers seemed set in their minds, seeing him not as a man, but as a problem. The man's breathing grew slower as he tried to stay calm, telling himself to be patient, that this would end soon. But deep down, he felt a heavy sadness. This wasn't just about the questions or the stop. It was about how little people sometimes see those who have lived long, full lives. Then, just when it seemed the situation might get worse, a figure appeared nearby, someone who knew him well. Someone the officers did not expect to see here. This person's eyes were steady and strong, calm but full of power. Without saying a word yet, just by standing there, he changed the whole mood. The officers looked at him differently, suddenly, unsure. The elderly man looked up at this figure, a flicker of hope rising inside him. Maybe things were about to change. The officers didn't ease up. Instead, their voices grew sharper, their questions faster. The elderly man stood quietly, trying to explain himself. But the words felt like they bounced off a wall. It was as if no matter what he said, they had already made up their minds. One officer stepped closer, his eyes hard and suspicious. The man felt a chill run through him, even though the sun was still shining bright above. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He had just been walking, minding his own business. But now he was being treated like a criminal. The man's hands shook more noticeably, and his voice, usually soft but steady, started to wobble as he pleaded for kindness. "I don't understand," he said. "Why are you stopping me? What did I do?" The officers didn't answer. Instead, one of them reached out abruptly, trying to grab the man's arm. The sudden movement startled him. His heart pounded fast. The man tried to pull away gently, not wanting trouble, but the officer held firm. "Calm down," the officer said, but the tone was anything but calm. It felt like a warning, not a comfort. Around them, people noticed what was happening. Some stopped to watch, their faces showing worry or anger. Others just hurried past, not wanting to get involved. The elderly man felt more alone than ever. The trust he had built in this community over the years seemed to disappear in an instant. He remembered his younger days, how he always believed in fairness and respect. He had taught his children to live with honor and kindness. But now, as the officers questioned him roughly, that belief felt fragile. The man's chest tightened with sadness. He wasn't just hurt by the rough treatment. He was broken by the idea that people could judge him by how he looked instead of who he was. The officer's words were sharp, but it wasn't just about what they said. It was the way they looked at him, like he was invisible, like he didn't matter. The man's eyes filled with tears, but he blinked hard to hold them back. He didn't want to cry in front of strangers. He just wanted to go home. And then, just when the tension felt too heavy to bear, the sun appeared. He stepped forward calmly, but with a quiet power that filled the space around him. The officers noticed him immediately. Their faces changed, their harshness fading into uncertainty. They didn't expect this man to be here. They didn't expect him to be the son of the man they were holding. The son's voice was steady and strong as he spoke. He didn't yell or threaten. He simply said, "Let him go. This is enough." There was a weight in his words, the kind of weight that comes from years of earning respect, not by fear, but by fairness, and standing up for what's right. The officers hesitated. They glanced at each other, then back at the son. Slowly, they released the elderly man's arm. The man looked at his son with relief, a small smile breaking through the sadness. The son put his hand gently on his father's shoulder, steadying him. It wasn't just a moment of rescue. It was a moment of justice. The son had stepped in not only for his father, but for everyone who had ever been judged unfairly. And in that quiet street, as the officers stepped back, something changed. The air grew lighter. The hope returned. The elderly man took a deep breath. He knew this wasn't the end. There would be more struggles ahead, more battles to fight. But in that moment with his son by his side, he felt strong again, not just because of the power his son carried, but because of the love that connected them, a love that no injustice could break. The son didn't rush into the scene yelling or demanding. Instead, he approached quietly, with calm confidence. That made people stop and notice. His presence alone changed the energy around them. People who had been tense and uneasy suddenly felt something shift in the air, a sense of respect, even a little fear. He wasn't just anyone. In this town, people knew who he was, not because he shouted or showed off, but because he had earned his place over years of hard work and fairness. As a judge, he had a reputation for being tough but just, someone who didn't tolerate unfairness or cruelty. When he spoke, people listened. When he acted, things changed. But today, he wasn't here in a courtroom. He was here as a son. And all the power and respect he carried was because of the love he had for his family. The officers looked at him closely, recognition flickering in their eyes. They knew who he was. They knew the son of the man they were holding was not someone to ignore. Their harshness softened, replaced by hesitation and a need to be careful. The son stood tall beside his father. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to show anger or frustration. His quiet strength was enough. It was the kind of strength that comes from years of experience, from knowing the right words to say and when to say nothing at all. The elderly man looked up at his son, feeling a mix of pride and relief. He knew that his son's presence meant safety. It meant that he would no longer be alone in this moment. For the first time since the officers had stopped him, the man felt a small spark of hope. The son's eyes met his father's, and without words, they shared an understanding. This wasn't just about today's trouble. It was about a lifetime of respect and dignity. It was about standing up when it mattered most. The son then turned to the officers. His voice was calm, but firm. He didn't accuse or blame. He simply reminded them that this man, his father, deserved respect. That no one should be treated with suspicion or harshness just because of how they look or how old they are. The officers shifted uncomfortably, realizing they had crossed a line. They had treated an innocent man unfairly, and now the son was making sure they knew it. But the son didn't want to make enemies. He wanted justice. He wanted fairness. And above all, he wanted his father to be treated with kindness. The crowd, watching grew quieter. Some people nodded slightly, others whispered among themselves. The son's words had touched something deep, a reminder that everyone deserves dignity, no matter their age or background. Slowly, the officers began to step back, their faces serious but respectful. The son put a hand gently on his father's shoulder, steadying him and showing the world that they stood together. This moment was more than just a rescue. It was a powerful message. That strength doesn't always come from shouting or fighting. Sometimes, it comes from standing silently but firmly, from knowing your worth and demanding respect without anger. The son and father walked away together side by side. The man's steps were steadier now, his heart lighter. He knew the road ahead might still be hard, but with his son by his side, he could face anything. The town would remember this day, not just because of what happened on the street, but because of the quiet power of a son who stood tall for his father and for justice. As the son stepped closer, the atmosphere around them shifted almost immediately. What had been tense and uncertain now carried a weight of authority and quiet control. He didn't rush or demand. Instead, he moved with purpose and calm, like someone who understood exactly what needed to be done. The officers, who had been so firm and unyielding just moments before, suddenly seemed unsure. Their eyes flicked toward each other as if silently asking, "Do you know who he is?" The son's reputation in the town was well known, a judge who wasn't just feared but respected because he was fair, smart, and unwavering in his sense of justice. He didn't need to raise his voice to make his presence felt. The power in his quiet confidence filled the space. His gaze met the eyes of each officer, steady and unwavering. Without a word, he communicated that this was serious, that they had made a mistake. The officers loosened their grip on the elderly man, who now looked up at his son with a mix of relief and pride. The son reached out, placing a steadying hand on his father's shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but it said so much: love, protection, and solidarity. With calm authority, the son spoke to the officers. His tone was firm but respectful, demanding fairness without anger. "You need to treat my father with respect. He hasn't done anything wrong. This needs to stop." His words were clear, and the officers could feel the strength behind them. One of the officers took a step back, lowering his hand as if realizing for the first time how harsh they had been. The tension that had gripped the street began to ease. People nearby held their breath, watching the change unfold. The son didn't just speak for his father in that moment. He spoke for all who have ever been treated unfairly, for those whose voices were ignored or silenced. His presence was a reminder that justice isn't just something that happens in courtrooms. It starts in moments like these, when someone stands up and says, "This isn't right." As the officers backed away, the son turned to his father and gave a small, reassuring smile. The man's shoulders relaxed and a light returned to his eyes. Together, they started to walk away from the scene, the son supporting his father's slow steps. But even as they moved forward, the son's mind was already working. He knew this incident wasn't just an isolated moment. It was a sign of deeper problems that needed to be faced, not ignored. He thought about how he could use his position to make a difference, to help change how people were treated, especially those like his father who deserved respect and dignity. The community watching them knew something important had happened. They saw a family united, standing strong against injustice. And they saw a son who wasn't afraid to step in when it mattered most, someone who used his power not to intimidate, but to protect. The sun was still shining, but now the day felt different, filled with hope, and the promise that change was possible when people stood together. The son didn't let the moment pass without making it clear. This wasn't just about his father. It was about respect, fairness, and the kind of justice everyone deserved. He stood tall, his voice steady as he addressed the officers. "This treatment is not acceptable. My father is a man who has lived with dignity, just like anyone else. He deserves to be treated with respect. There was no anger in his voice, no shouting or threats, just a quiet strength that commanded attention. The officers listened, their eyes shifting uneasily. They could tell this man wasn't here to argue, but to hold them accountable. He wasn't just the son of the elderly man. He was a judge who understood the law and knew when it was being broken. The crowd nearby watched silently, some nodding, in agreement, others whispering. The son's words echoed in the stillness, a powerful reminder that everyone should be treated fairly, no matter their age or background. It was more than a lesson for the officers. It was a message for the whole community. One officer cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "We didn't mean any harm," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. The son shook his head slowly. "Intentions don't erase the impact. What matters is how you act and how you treat people." He looked back at his father, who stood quietly, tired but proud. The son's respect for him was clear in his eyes. He then turned again to the officers. "If you want to serve and protect this community, you need to remember that respect comes first. Without it, there is no justice." The officers exchanged glances, realizing the truth in those words. Slowly, the tension began to dissolve. The officers stepped back fully, allowing the elderly man's space to move freely again. The son gently guided his father away from the scene, but his voice remained clear and firm. "This is a lesson for all of us," he said, "not just to the officers, but to everyone watching. We must stand up against injustice when we see it. We must treat each other with kindness and fairness." The crowd began to disperse, but the impact of the moment lingered. The son's calm courage had turned a painful encounter into a powerful stand for dignity. People whispered about it as they went on with their day, about the man who defended his father, and about the father who had raised a son strong enough to demand respect. As they walked away together, the son kept his hand gently on his father's shoulder. It wasn't just a gesture of protection, it was a promise. A promise that they would keep fighting for fairness, that they wouldn't let moments like this be forgotten. The sun continued to shine down on the street, but now it felt warmer, softer, like a new beginning. The son knew this was just one small step in a larger journey, but it was a step that mattered. Because justice isn't just about laws written on paper. It's about the respect we show to each other every day. And in that quiet moment, with his father by his side, the son stood tall, not just as a judge, but as a protector of dignity, fairness, and hope. The incident didn't end when the son and father walked away from the street that day. It stayed with the people who saw it, echoing in conversations, in quiet reflections, and in the way the town looked at itself. What had seemed like a simple moment had turned into something much bigger. Neighbors talked about it over coffee, in church halls, and at local stores. They spoke about the importance of respect, about how the elderly man was treated unfairly, and how his son had stepped in to protect him. The story touched something deep in the community, a reminder that everyone deserved dignity, no matter their age or the color of their skin. For many, it sparked a new awareness. People started asking questions they hadn't before. How often? Did things like this happen? And how many went unnoticed? Were the voices of the older and quieter members of the community being heard? And what could be done to change the way people were treated, especially by those meant to protect them? The son's role in all this became clearer to everyone. He wasn't just a judge who made decisions in courtrooms far away. He was a son who stood up for his family, yes, but he was also a leader in the community. A leader who showed that strength wasn't about power over others, but about standing up for what was right, even when it was hard. People saw how he used his position to bring attention to issues that affected real lives, issues like fairness, justice, and respect. He listened to stories from neighbors, worked with local leaders, and quietly pushed for change. He reminded the town that true justice starts with how we treat each other every day. Some who had never spoken out before found courage in the son's example. They began sharing their own stories, speaking up when they saw unfair treatment. The town started to shift, slowly but surely, toward greater understanding and kindness. But change wasn't easy. The son knew that. Old habits and fears didn't disappear overnight. There were still moments of doubt and frustration, still times when people felt unheard or misunderstood. Yet, the son never gave up. He kept walking the streets, talking to people, and standing up for those who needed it most. Through it all, the bond between father and son grew even stronger. The father saw his son not only as a protector, but as a beacon of hope for the whole community. And the son carried his father's wisdom and dignity with him, reminding himself every day why the fight mattered. That day on the street had been painful, yes. But it had also sparked something powerful, a movement toward respect, empathy, and justice that reached far beyond just one family. The town was beginning to see that when people stand together, when they listen to each other's stories, real change can happen. And the son's quiet strength was at the heart of that change, inspiring everyone to believe that a better, fairer future was possible. The years had taught the elderly man many things, but none as important as the strength found in family. After that day, when he was stopped and questioned unfairly, he knew something had changed, not just for him, but for the whole community. It was a moment that would stay with him forever, but it also became a turning point in his life and his son's life. The bond between them was more than just father and son. It was a quiet force that carried them through the hardest times. The son's steady hand on his father's shoulder wasn't just a gesture, it was a symbol of protection, respect, and love. They had faced injustice together and found strength in each other. The father often thought about how proud he was of his son, not just because he was a judge or a respected figure in town, but because he used his power wisely. His son stood up for what was right, not just for his family, but for everyone who couldn't stand up for themselves. That meant more to the father than words could say. Even as the town slowly began to change, as more people started speaking, up against unfair treatment and showing kindness, the father knew the work wasn't finished. There would always be challenges, moments when people forgot the importance of respect and dignity. But he also knew something else. Hope was stronger than fear, and love was more powerful than hate. The son continued to walk the path of justice, but he never forgot where he came from or who he was protecting. Every decision he made, every step he took, was guided by the lessons his father had taught him. Lessons about kindness, patience, and standing tall, even when the world tried to push you down. Their story became more than just a family's fight. It became a symbol for the whole community. A reminder that change starts with one person willing to speak up, one family willing to stand together. That even in the face of unfairness, there is strength to be found when people support each other. Elderly man would often sit on his porch, watching the neighborhood with a calm heart. He saw his son walking through the streets, greeting people, listening to their stories, fighting for fairness. And he smiled, knowing that his son's courage was a light that would keep shining long after that difficult day was over. In the end, it wasn't about fear or anger. It was about standing tall with quiet strength, about fighting for justice with respect and love, and about knowing that no matter what happens, family will always be there, strong, unshakable, and full of hope. This story reminds us all that sometimes the most powerful moments come from the simplest acts. A son standing up for his father, a community coming together to demand respect, and a father feeling the deep pride of a family's unbreakable bond. Because at the heart of every struggle for justice, there is a human story, a story of courage, love, and the belief that a better tomorrow is always possible.